We're going to spend most of our time in Genesis today. So if you have your Bibles, just put a finger in Genesis chapter 25. That's where we're going to start. I'm not going to read every single thing. I'm not going to read every single passage. I'm going to tell the story. And the story is going to go quite fast. So if you need a reference point, it'll be somewhere between Genesis 25 and 31. That's going to be Jacob's story. Yeah. So we're not going to cover every single verse, but we're going to go through a little bit of the discussion, and I'll tell the story as we go. You guys will know a few weeks ago I went to Vienna, where Lizzie and Heinrich are from, their original country. And this is because I had one evening free. I decided to go and listen to a symphony orchestra. Vienna is known for its symphony orchestras and its orchestral music, and this is the nice building that I went to. It's one of the famous music halls, and this is what it looks like inside. I was standing at the back, so I had a nice view of the whole thing, and the music was really cool because it is a really interesting design. All the concert halls in this building are rectangular. They're not circular or semicircular, and that's because the acoustics are better if it's long. So they don't actually need any mics. You can just hear the orchestra by itself. There's no carpet in there. It's all wooden floors, so the sound is really very nice. Vienna in Austria in particular is famous for its classical music because of one of the most famous composers in history. Does anyone know who that is? Mozart. This person on the right. Mozart is depicted in this format. Some of you will have seen other pictures. Last week, remember, I brought the dessert back for you guys. They had this picture on it, right? It stamps this. This is the famous picture of Mozart. Except many people may not know, but Mozart actually had a compatriot. And when I say compatriot, there's a reason why this emoji is here, is because this was not really like sort of a friend, but he was almost like a competitor. And he's a friend of me. Yeah, that's another word you can use. So this guy on the left, does anyone know his name? Anyone a classical music follower? We were forced to watch a movie from the 1980s in music class, I remember, in year 11 and 12. I was forced to watch this movie. It's called Amadeus. That's the name of the movie, 1984. It's some Oscar-winning movie. It depicts the relationship between these two people. This is Mozart on the right, and this is Antonio Salieri on the left. Salieri was slightly older than Mozart, as you can see in the picture. He was the boy genius. He was the older, more traditional court musician. And if you look at some of the stories, people would say that there was a disagreement or a jealousy between the two of them because he was jealous of Mozart's genius. Mozart died very young, but he was a genius from the age of 8. People could tell that he had a lot of musical talent. And so the movie actually describes, I think it over-dramatizes it a little bit, but it describes the disagreement between the two famous composers. Now in the Bible today, we're going to look at a very similar scenario, except that this was not between two musicians, but this was between two brothers. Now, I don't know how many of you have siblings. Some of us have siblings. I don't know whether you have a rivalry between your siblings or maybe a jealousy. Maybe it's worse than Antonio Salieri and Mozart. Maybe it's better. I'm not sure. But what we do see is that in Genesis chapter 25, where we're going to start our lesson and our sharing on this morning, it describes a relationship between two brothers that doesn't start off particularly well. Genesis chapter 25, it starts to describe this story in verse 19. And so in verse 19, the Bible says, this is the genealogy of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham begot Isaac. Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah as wife. Now Isaac pleaded with the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord granted his plea, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. So Isaac and Rebekah are going to have kids, right? And the children struggled together within her, and she said, if all is well, why am I like this? So she went to inquire of the Lord. Now, I don't know, there's only one person that can really tell us what it feels like when a baby is kicking here today, which is Catherine, right? But this description here tells us that Rebekah felt that something was not quite right. Why was it not quite right? Because the twins in her body, in her womb, in her tummy, were moving so much that she was worried that something's going wrong. It's like World War III inside, right? They're like stirring around. And she goes to pray, And she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Bible tells her, the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, 2 people shall be separated, 1 people shall be stronger, and the older shall serve the younger. So when the days were fulfilled for her to give birth, indeed there were twins in her womb. 2 babies came out. 2 babies came out. And the first came out red. He was like a hairy garment all over, so they called his name Esau. Afterward his brother came out, and his hand took hold of Esau's heel, so his name was Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. So the boys grew, and so on and so forth. So there are actually, this is a cartoon depiction of the story. Esau was born first. Esau is the older child. Jacob is born after. But what they found when, this is the hairy one, yep, the red color hair. And after Esau was born, when Jacob was coming out, the description is that Jacob was holding on to Esau's leg or foot, and he would not let go. And you can imagine that's a symbolism of the chaos happening in the abdomen, the tummy before the babies were born. Jacob is holding on. And in fact, the word Jacob, his name, actually describes this event. Jacob's name means supplanter. It means con artist. It means someone who is trying to supplant. You know, when you supplant someone, you're trying to take over. You're trying to undermine someone. That's the name. Can you imagine your name is Mr. Underminer? Mr. Supplanter? Well, that's what they named him, because Jacob was literally grabbing his brother's heel. As a result, if you look at verse 27, so the boys grew, and Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, but Jacob was a mild man, dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. This is Genesis 25, verse 27. Now, what we start to see here is the start and the corner of the story of Jacob. We see that Jacob is born. Jacob is holding on to the heel of Esau, and he comes out, and as a result of this instance, as a result of this incident, as a result of this birth, there is introduced this concept of favoritism into the family. The dad likes Esau, and the mom likes Jacob. Now, I don't know about you. I'm not an only child, and I can tell you which parent likes me more and which parent likes my sister more. And I'm sure you guys, if you think about it, you maybe experience the same thing, right? Okay, Bessie is nodding, so clearly this is not a unique experience. In fact, Time magazine ran this article describing the concept of favoritism, why mom liked you the best. Now, what happens here is that because of this scenario, because of this situation, what ends up happening is that Jacob is favored by his mom, and Esau is favored because of Isaac. I want to put to you today that one of the challenges in this space is that the struggle for forgiveness, the struggle to forgive, or the struggle for forgiveness is often rooted when someone feels like they are favored, or someone feels inferior and unloved. Now, I don't know about you, even if you don't have siblings, you might feel that sometimes things are unfair in your work. Maybe your colleague gets a promotion above you. Maybe your boss favors one member of the team over everyone else. Maybe there are situations where you feel like you are unfairly, inferiorly treated, or unloved, or becoming a favorite. And as a result, that causes a sentiment where you don't want to forgive. You struggle to forgive. Maybe you've had that experience before. And this is certainly the experience that we start to see in Jacob's life as we continue going along. The next part of the story, Jacob and Esau had they're growing up, and obviously the favoritism continues. The story goes that one day Esau is super hungry and he's hunting, and he comes back, and Jacob sells him, or rather trades a pot of lentils for the birthright. You see, in those days, for those of you who may not be familiar with the story, the birthright was an inheritance, a double portion of blessing given to the firstborn. So if you're the oldest male child in the family, you get double the blessing compared to the younger male child. Now you can imagine if that was your favorite, or you were dad's favorite, even more so Esau was going to receive a double portion of blessing, and less so Jacob. So Jacob here, being Rebekah's favorite child, starts to understand through his mom's prompting that he wants to receive the birthright because that was promised to Rebekah before the kids were born. God said that the younger will be stronger than the older, and the older shall serve the younger. And so Jacob is starting to think of ways where he can get that birthright. And so in the midst of Esau being very hungry, he trades his birthright for some lentils. Some of you can smell the rice. If you're hungry, maybe you want to trade something for the rice. So here we see that in that day, verse 31, verse 32, verse 33, and 34, so he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Thus Jacob ate, drank, arose, and went his way. Esau despised his birthright. The next part of the story we see is that we go along, and Jacob has already taken Esau's birthright. If you fast forward a little bit to Genesis chapter 27, the whole chapter, you'll see what happens when Jacob actually takes the birthright. Again, I'm not going to read every single verse. We're just going to go into some parts of the story. Now, I don't know about you, but when I was young, I'm not a big fan of roller coasters. Anyone a big fan of roller coasters? Okay, Vessi, Heinrich, May, and Risa. Okay, Risa, you a big fan of roller coasters? Unfortunately, I wasn't very tall when I was young. I blame my mum because the genes weren't very good. So you've seen these things before, right? Fred would definitely pass because you'll be above. But in the in those situations, in the roller coaster ride, the taller you are, the better it is, right? Because you can, if you're this height, sorry, you can't. You must be accompanied by adult. If you're tall enough, you can ride the roller coaster by yourself. A few weeks ago, I went with my colleagues to a new hot pot restaurant in Glenville. I might have told you guys about this. In that hot pot restaurant, there is a measuring height measure. If you are below 1.4 meters, you get half price. And if you're above 1.4 meters, you are full price, right? So it's the opposite from the roller coaster. In the roller coaster, the taller you are, the more likely you are to go on the roller coaster. In the hot pot restaurant, the shorter you are, the cheaper the price, right? So in front of me, I saw a family. The mom was trying to ask the girl to take off her shoes so that she would be less than 1.4 meters because she was wearing some shoes that was a bit chunky so that she could have half price, right? And she was trying to tell him, why don't you just take off your shoe and cheat the system so that we can pay cheaper for you so that it's cheaper to go in. It's quite a funny thing to observe. Well, we might laugh at that, but if you look at the story here, we see the same thing. We see Jacob trying to trick his way to receive the birthright. For those of you who are familiar with the story, you'll remember that when Isaac is getting old, his eyes are getting bad, he can't really see well, and so he relies on his smell and his sense of touch to recognize who's coming in. And so in this part of the story, what we start to see is that Jacob takes the birthright, or rather Jacob receives the blessing of the birthright instead of Esau because he pretends to be Esau. When Isaac was getting old, he asked Esau to cook for him and he was about to bless him with the birthright. Rebekah, mom, hears it, favors the younger son, tells Jacob, quickly, your brother has gone to catch some food. Why don't you dress up? So they kill a sheep and put the skin on top of him so that his arms become hairy. And he walks into the tent, and Isaac is a bit suspicious because he hears Jacob's voice and it doesn't sound like Esau. But because he feels the hands, the hairy hands, he's like, okay, maybe this is Esau. And Jacob tricks his father, just like someone was trying to game the system with the height limit, and receives the blessing instead of Esau. And so here we see the next part of this concept of wrestling and struggle. Sometimes it starts off by favoritism, or you feel inferior, or you feel unloved. And because you feel that way, you then try and figure out a way to try and make it up to get that love or to be less inferior. And so what we see here is that because Jacob feels that he is not treated fairly by his father, he games the system by pretending to be his brother to get the birthright that he thinks is his. Does that make sense? Sometimes in our life, subconsciously as we go through, even though we may not intentionally set out to do so, because of the circumstances of our life, we try and come up with ways to use loopholes or game the system to get to a place where we can take what we think is rightfully ours, where we can gain what we think is rightfully ours, where we can do what we think should be done because it is not fair that it has been done that way. That may be in, again, your life, your career, your job, your whatever it may be, your relationships, your family, the things that you do. If you feel that the world is stacked against you, you use every loophole to try and get back to be even. And so what we see here is that because of that, sometimes Jacob decides to take things into his own hands. In fact, one of the Bible commentaries describes this process. It says the error that had led to Jacob's sin, talking about tricking his father, in obtaining the birthright by fraud was now clearly set before him. He had not trusted God's promises, but had sought by his own efforts to bring about that which God would have accomplished in his own time and way. Sometimes in our experience, in our haste to make things happen, in our haste to right the wrongs that we think we have, the reason we struggle to forgive, the reason we struggle and wrestle with forgiveness is because we are trying to forgive and do things in our own way, not in God's timing and way. Jacob may have achieved the right outcome, but he went about it the totally wrong way. He could have blamed his mom, he could have blamed himself, he could have done all those things. But the challenge that Jacob faced is the challenge that we face. Sometimes we struggle to wait, sometimes we struggle to listen, sometimes we struggle to learn, sometimes we struggle to be willing, and we take things into our own hands because we are trying to right a wrong that we feel has been slighted against us. It's not my fault Esau came first. It's not my fault Jacob could have said that, he was born first and that my dad likes him more than me. It's not my fault, but I deserve something as well. And so in that cry for being fair, in that cry to deserve something, in that cry, Jacob does not want to allow this to go by, but tries to use his own methods to achieve some outcome that he thinks is right. How many times in your life have you tried to achieve an outcome that you think is right by your own ways? How many times in your life where you feel that you are unfairly treated and therefore it gives me license to do something to right that wrong? How many times have we seen this happen, maybe not in our own life, but in the life of people around us, in the people that we love, and as a result, we struggle to understand how to move forward? Well, the story goes that Jacob gets blessed and then Esau comes back. Now Esau realizes what has happened, but Isaac has already given out the birthright. You can't give out two birthrights. There's only one birthright. So once you give it, you can't take it back. So once I give it to Reese, you can't give it back to me, right? And then I can give it to someone else. Neither can you give it to someone else. In fact, Jacob would have said, well, Esau, rightfully, you sold your birthright to me. So that's the double confirmation that it doesn't belong to you. Number one, Dad gave it to me. Number two, you sold it to me anyway. And so Jacob becomes in this pattern of defensiveness. Yes, oh yeah, but you sold it to me, right? And you were out hunting and therefore it deserves to be given to me. Too bad for you. Esau gets really upset. And if you read the story, he's so angry that he wants to kill his brother. So what we start to see here is that Jacob is starting to experience what happens when you struggle to forgive. The spiral just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And you can understand now why last week when Benny was sharing, he was describing the story of Joseph, accumulation of all the debt of unforgiveness since Isaac all the way down to Joseph. And so Jacob begins to inherit that, so much so that eventually the animosity is so great that Jacob's mother, Rebecca, tells Jacob to go away, as in leave, to go to another country, to the country of her ancestors, far away. It's approximately 3 days' walk, far away, to find a wife, under the pretense of finding a wife, but really to separate from the animosity of his brother. One of the sad things about this story is that Jacob never ever sees his mother alive again. After this point in time, because of the curse of what he did, he never gets to see his mother alive again. As he's journeying along this journey, he's now sent away. Esau, his brother, wants to kill him, doesn't dare to kill him when his father is still alive, but is waiting for the father to die before he kills his brother. He goes away, and in the middle of going away, he is troubled. And so some of you would have seen this cartoon depiction before of Jacob's ladder. If you start to read in chapter 28, you will start to see what happens. This is verse 10 of chapter 28 in Genesis. It says, Jacob went out from Beersheba, went toward Haran. He came to a certain place and stayed there all night because the sun has set. And you can see here there's a dream that he has. In the midst of being troubled, in Genesis chapter 28, verse 10, Jacob is given a dream by God. In the dream, Jacob is promised that God will give him comfort and God will give him blessings, even though the things he has done was not correct. And behold, the Lord stood above it, verse 13, and said, I am the Lord God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and your descendants. And he goes on and on and on, and he says, behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have spoken to you. Sometimes in the middle of distress, sometimes in the middle of this struggle to forgive, God still promises you comfort. And so if you're going through an experience today where there's a bit of turmoil in your life, when you're going through the Jacob experience where he tricks his brother, where he does things his own way, the outcome is poor, God still provides divine help and guidance for Jacob. I don't know what experiences you may be going through in your life right now, but God does provide that promise of satisfaction, of comfort when you rely on him. Now Jacob journeys across. We fast forward to Genesis chapter 29. He gets to the new land. And the next part of the story, I'm going to tell it in very short form because it's a very prolonged story over quite a number of years, but it's a very interesting one. Jacob gets there and he meets his future wife. The name of the wife is Rachel. Okay, so Isaac and Rebekah, mom and dad, Jacob and Esau, brothers, and Jacob now meets his wife. The name is Rachel. He really likes this person, and so he stays with the family. The dad's name of Rebekah is not Rebekah. The dad's name of Rachel is Laben, and he's working for Laben. He decides to get into agreement. He has no money because he's run away from home, from far away. And so he says, instead of a dowry, which they used to pay in those days, I will work for you. And so he works for Laben for how long? 7 years. Can you imagine that? How many of you have worked 7 years for your employer before? Janelle has worked a long time for her employer. It's a long time. But the Bible actually describes that for Jacob, it was but a few days because he was doing it because of love. And so, Jacob works for a few days. He's about to get married, right? The big celebration. This is AI-generated example of what a wedding could be. Jacob comes to the wedding, and there's a big wedding feast, a big wedding celebration. Maybe it wasn't quite like this. But anyway, he gets married. And the next morning, when he wakes up, after getting married the previous day, he realizes that he has been deceived. Who did he marry? He married Rachel's sister, older sister, whose name is Leah. In fact, the Bible describes that Leah has really nice eyes. That's what, if you read the instruction, it's quite a funny description. Well, maybe he was mesmerized by the eyes or something. Anyway, he didn't recognize the eyes. He got married to Leah. And he goes to Laban, and the father, and he goes, how could you do this? And Laban's response was, well, in our culture, the older one must be married before the younger. So therefore, we had no choice but to give you Leah. And so he comes to a negotiation. He says, okay, well, after 1 week of marriage celebrations, he now has 2 wives, not one. He has Leah and Rachel, but he has to work for another 7 years. So what you start to see is that all of Jacob's struggle was not just from the time before he was born all the way to now. Now he's starting to get a taste of his own medicine. Right? Now it's the opposite. He was deceiving his father to get the birthright. Now he's being deceived. And the interesting thing to see here is that not only does Jacob get deceived once, he then gets deceived more often. And this spiral starts to repeat itself. Because he got deceived, the Bible describes that he prefers Rachel over Leah. So he has two wives. This is why you should not have more than one spouse. But anyway, he has more than one spouse. He prefers Rachel over Leah. And so Leah starts to feel unloved. Does it sound familiar to you? So we start off at the start. Jacob feels unloved because the father likes Esau more and the mom likes him more. So he tricks his father. Now he comes here. Now he gets tricked. And now he gets tricked and he has two wives. And the two wives, he doesn't like Leah because he got tricked by Leah. So he likes Rachel. But the irony is Leah is the one that can bear children and Rachel cannot. So what happens? Now Rachel doesn't like Leah. And so because Rachel doesn't... You're following the story. I know it's a very convoluted story. That's why I abbreviated for you. Jacob likes Rachel, doesn't like Leah. Leah has children, so that Leah doesn't like Rachel. Now Rachel doesn't like Leah. And because Rachel doesn't like Leah, she says, well, because I can't have children, I'm going to give you my maidservant who you can have children with. So now Jacob has not one wife, not two. Now he has 2.5. Okay, let's call it 3, right? So he has 3 wives, concubines. And now he has 3 wives, and now Leah is unhappy because Rachel's maidservant is having children. So Leah says, now that's not fair, I'll give you my maidservant. So now Jacob has how many wives? 4 wives. Now if you draw the family tree, it's a very convoluted family tree. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 children to Leah, 2 children to Leah's servant, 2 children to Rachel, 2 children to Rachel's servant. In fact, the Bible describes that Jacob... I know this sounds really funny, but Jacob preferred to be in the field with his sheep because it was easier than coming home to face 4 wives. In fact, you read out of it there, it says Jacob came out of the field and all the 4 wives are waiting for him at the tent. What a convoluted story, because why? They all feel the same way that Jacob had felt. Can you see this is like a family problem? Starts with Jacob and Esau, then Rebekah and Isaac, and then Jacob and Esau argue, then now he comes, then it's Jacob and Rachel and Leah and Zilpah and Bilhah. What a convoluted story. What this tells me is that sometimes the lack of forgiveness transcends generations. Sometimes the lack of forgiveness breeds resentment. Sometimes the lack and the struggle with forgiveness makes you feel like you can never get on top, no matter what you try. Whatever Jacob does, someone is unhappy. Yeah? Whatever Jacob does, whatever Laban does, Jacob is unhappy. There's this constant unhappiness. So Jacob, the irony of it, he runs away thinking he can escape unhappiness only to arrive into his own unhappiness. You ever experienced that in your life before? You go down one path to escape from unhappiness. You think that going halfway across the world will allow you to run away from your problems like Jacob, only to find yourself in the deepest problems that have the same root cause. You run away from one job, hoping to escape all the chaos, only to end up in somewhere else where it's just as chaotic. You escape one group of friends, only to arrive in another group of friends with even more chaos and problems. And we start to see that Jacob is going through this experience. In fact, the only things that holds Jacob together in this time is the promise that God has given him with the ladder, that one day you will go back to your homeland and I will allow you to bring it back. Now that is a promise and that is a challenge, not just because it is a nice thing to have, but Jacob was faced with the very reality that if he went back to his home country, his brother would try to kill him. I'm not in a similar situation. Some of you know, if I go back to one country, I may not be allowed to see Fred ever again, right? I'd have to do some time and maybe at least 2 to 4 years out if I go back to that specific country. Jacob is fearful because if he goes back to that place, he is going to be killed by his brother. There is no doubt that his brother is out for him. And so God's promise that one day I will bring you back is actually not just a promise. It's like it flies in direct contrast to what Jacob thinks is possible. The irony of it is, as he's going through this experience, Laban tricks him not once, but more than once. So at this time, if you read and continue down in the story, what starts to happen is that Jacob is getting very rich, right? Not only does he have 4 wives, He now has many, many children, and at that stage he didn't have all the children yet, but still had quite a lot of kids. But because of his skills and because God blessed him, Jacob has lots of wealth. So he is starting to accumulate wealth. If you look at Genesis chapter 30 now, it's starting to describe his agreement with his father-in-law Laban. Jacob is getting rich because whatever Jacob does, it seems to flourish. And now Jacob is having a negotiation with his father-in-law. He says, "Father-in-law, I worked for you for at least 14 years. This guy is due his long service leave, right? 14 years. And at this juncture, he says, I've worked for you for 14 years. I need to start earning some things for myself. I can't just keep working for you. I already married your 2 daughters. There's nothing else to that you can give me." So Laban says, "Okay, here's what we're going to do, right? You put in the effort, and this is how we're going to divide it." This is the old school way of dividing. So there's a flock of sheep, let's say 100 sheep. Jacob, you look after the 100 sheep. Whatever sheep are born, the lambs of the new season, whatever is brown is yours, and whatever is white is mine. Whatever is spotted is yours, whatever is speckled is mine. So this is the way they divide, right? So they let God say, okay, if Jacob, if you get 55, you get 55, I get 45. This is the type of concept that they use. So what you start to see is that as they're going through, Jacob's skills, and God blesses Jacob so that he gains more sheep. Now Laban is unhappy. You see the unfair thing coming back again? So Laban last minute changes. At first it was Jacob gets brown and Laban gets white. At the last minute he saw more brown ones being born. So he said, no, actually I said Laban should get brown and Jacob should get white. And when he changes, the birth patterns of the animals changes so that Jacob keeps accumulating wealth. Who feels unfair now? Laban. And so Jacob gets so annoyed. If you look at chapter 30, verse 29, 31, 30, etc., 34, it talks about the male goats that were speckled and spotted, all the female goats that were spotted, and then they talk about the trees and the types of fruits from the trees. It was also chaos. And you look at verse 41, and it came to pass whenever the stronger livestock conceived that Jacob placed the rods before the eyes of the livestock in the gutters, etc., etc. Thus the man became exceedingly prosperous and had large flocks, female and male servants, and camels and donkeys. It gets to the stage where Jacob not only now has to deal with 4 wives and how many children, but he also has to deal with an angry father-in-law. What a convoluted family story this is. Chapter 31, it says, Jacob heard the words of Laban's sons, verse 1, saying, Jacob has taken away all that was our father's, and from what our fathers he has acquired all this wealth. Does it sound familiar to you? Jacob is accused of stealing Esau's birthright, which entitles him to all the wealth that his father has. Now someone else is accusing Jacob of stealing the wealth of who? The father-in-law. Because why? He's collecting all the sheep that are born and all the animals and the flocks and donkeys and camels. This is like, Jacob is like having, what they call it, deja vu, like over and over again. This is part of his life. And now you understand why Jacob's name is struggle, accused supplanter, struggle. There's a struggle going on. Jacob's life is all about tension and struggle and wrestling. I'll show you more of that in a second. The verse continues, Jacob saw the countenance of Laban, and indeed it was not favorable toward him. Then the Lord said to Jacob, go back to the land, to your fathers, to your family, and I will be with you. So God's instruction to Jacob is now, okay, time to go home. Now we're stuck here. If you were Jacob, this is like no-win situation. You go home, your brother's going to come for you. You stay here, you've got 4 wives to deal with, and your father-in-law is coming for you. You are rich, but no one is happy. Jacob is stuck in this situation. I don't know whether you feel stuck in your situation. You can call it whatever you want to call it. Catch-22, troubled, unsettled, uncertain, unclear. All his life, Jacob has been struggling. And anyway, he decides finally to leave this land and to go home. So he packs up his stuff, brings all his stuff, but as he's journeying towards home, he actually runs away from his father-in-law. He doesn't even tell his father-in-law he's leaving. That's the animosity that is in Jacob's life. I don't know about you, but this is the classic example of being rich doesn't mean you're happy. He has so many flocks. He has the wife that he wanted, plus another 3. He has lots of kids. He has everything that a man could dream for in those days, but he's not happy. He runs away from his father-in-law, but he's running towards his brother, who he thinks is going to kill him. I don't know whether you guys feel the same way. Sometimes I feel like that, right? You run around in a circle, like things behind you, not very good. Things in front of you, not really good. And you feel like you're just going like this. You're stuck between the two. Something behind is coming, it's not great. Something in front, it's not great. And then you feel like you're in Jacob's situation. And you start to see this is Jacob's mindset. And the struggle comes all the way back to this crucial story that we find in Genesis chapter 32. And I want to spend a bit of time reading this. He's so petrified by his brother after having escaped his deceitful father-in-law that he starts to send animals in front of him as presents to his brother to try and appease his anger. You ever done that before? You wrong someone, and then instead of talking to them, you just give them some gifts. Just send you something that's nice, I may appease your anger. Maybe they're less angry with me when I actually talk to them. I maybe give them a flower or food or something. Well, Jacob sends hundreds of animals to appease his brother. But yet, even though he may have appeased his guilt, it's still weighing heavily on his mind. We're going to pick up the story in verse 22. Genesis 32, verse 22. This is the turning point in Jacob's life. He arose that night and took his 2 wives, his 2 servants, and his 11 sons. Wow, lots of things there. And crossed over the ford of Jabbok. Jabbok is the river. He took them, sent them over the brook, and sent over what he had. So he gets to the river crossing, and he sends his entire family across the river with his animals and his servants and his possessions and his belongings, and he stays behind on the other side of the river. It's a very interesting move. He sends everyone across. Verse 24, then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. What time do you think Jacob started this process? Do you know, approximately? They crossed the river at night. How many of you have tried to cross the river at night before? A pleasant experience? Anyone try it? No? It's not a normal thing. You usually cross the river during the day. Why do you cross the river during the day? So to see. So you don't drown, so you can see where you're walking. Because when you're crossing it at night, especially in those days, it's not I build a bridge and I walk across the bridge at night. This is you've got to cross the river. And if you can't see where the rocks are in the river, you slip and you fall over. But Jacob is so petrified that Esau will catch them crossing the river in the day that he crosses it at night. And so he forces his family to go across first, and he stays behind, troubled. As he's sitting there troubled, as he's struggling with his mental demons, if I can call it that, that's going through his mind, everything starts to flash before him. And all of a sudden, when he's left alone, there is a man who wrestles with him until the breaking of day. That's a long time. Now I'm going to ask for illustration for a second. I'm going to pick on 2 people. They didn't volunteer, but too bad. Heinrich and Fred. Can you guys come up for a second? Fred, you can't delegate to anyone. Okay, we're going to try this. I'm not going to ask you to wrestle, but please come up here.
Oh, well, I'm ready.
Yeah. Okay, so if you guys... Okay, no, Heinrich, stand here. If you try and push against Fred, so put your hands on the shoulder. Yep, Fred, do the same thing.
Arms or something.
Yeah. Okay, and the other arm too. I just want you guys to push. Please don't fall over. Okay, start pushing. Someone's going to fall over. Okay, you can stop. How many seconds was that? That's like 3.5, 4 seconds. I want you to imagine, thank you, you guys can sit down. I want you to imagine Jacob doing that for the entire night. Do you think you'd be tired? How many of you would be tired? Yeah. In Mexico, there is, I don't know where you saw it there. In Mexico, there's a famous Zocalo is what they call it, a famous wrestling match or wrestling competition. They go to an arena where they wear a special mask and they start wrestling. You know on average how long a wrestling match lasts? On average. 6 minutes. 1 hour? Why, very strong, man. 6 minutes. Because why? Someone gets tired or someone gets pinned, right? And no matter how the other person struggles, they can't get back. I want you to imagine Jacob is so consumed and so stressed that he wrestles with this person for the whole night. I don't know about you, I couldn't wrestle with the whole night. I would just give up. Like halfway, I'm like, oh, I'm too tired, I can't do this. In fact, the person that wrestles with him, we later find out, is actually God himself. In history, there have been many examples of people actually painting this. This is Rembrandt's pictorial illustration of this story. This is Gustave Doré's perhaps the most famous illustration of Jacob's wrestling. And this is AI-generated wrestling, right? So this is modern day. But this is Rembrandt, 1600s, 1700s. You start to see this depiction. And we read the story here. Jacob was left alone, verse 24, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. Jacob is wrestling, and this is not just physical wrestling, but this is also, you can imagine, the stress that he's going through. Remember the commentary that I put before you earlier on, that from Patriarchs and Prophets 197, that is describing Jacob's mindset right at this point in time. It is at this point that Jacob comes face to face with the thing that triggered all the stress that he has in his life, which is what? The unwillingness to change. The decision that he made to go against God's plans and take things into his own hands, and the resentment that he has against his brother, his father, and everyone else that is around him. It is at this juncture, as he's at the crossroads of his life, that this angel comes to wrestle with Jacob. Many people think that this wrestling is just physical wrestling. You know, they had stress. Oh, Jacob needs to take out his stress. No. That's one. But in his mind, this is the only place in the Bible where we see this word in its truest form, the wrestle of Jacob. In Jeremiah chapter 30, it in fact describes Jacob's mindset. It describes that at the end of time, God's people will go through a time of Jacob's trouble. This is Jacob's trouble. Trouble is the wrestling of the mind, and he's also wrestling physically. Now, I don't know about you, but many times when you go through life, you get to this stage where because of the resentment, the bitterness, the unwillingness to forgive, all the things that go through your life, it bring you to a crossroads where you are wrestling with what you should do. And you may be wrestling in your brain, you may be wrestling physically, whether it's with physical health or something else, but whatever it is, you are at the crossroads just like Jacob. You may be broken, you may be guilty, you may be unworthy, you may be pleading for forgiveness, you may be struggling in your career, in your life, in your family, your relationships, in anything that you are going through. And at this very point, Jacob was so stressed that he didn't even realize who he was wrestling with. It symbolizes the stress in his life. Sometimes, when we I have difficult patients at work, when we delve into some of the challenging things that they go through in their life, they don't even know what they are fighting against anymore. They say they're stressed by X or Y or Z, but when you dig deeper, they don't really know because they've been going round and round in circles. Who is Jacob actually fighting against now? Is it Esau? Is it his father-in-law? Is it himself? You start to see the things that go through his mind. That might be a bit vague, but as you read the next few Bible verses, hopefully it crystallizes in your mind exactly what he was talking about. So let's go to verse 25. Now when he saw that he did not prevail against him, in other words, when the person that he's wrestling with, Jesus, God, realizes that Jacob would not prevail, he touched the socket of his hip, and the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint as he wrestled with him. The hip joint is perhaps the strongest joint in the body. It is encased in a ball and socket joint, so that it's incredibly powerful with almost more than 200 degrees of movement in your hip. This is a very difficult bone to dislocate, unless you're an old lady who falls down and cracks your hip. That's a different story. But it is an incredibly difficult bone to dislocate. And with a single touch, Jacob's hip is dislocated. It is at this very point that Jacob realizes, and he says, "Let me go, for the day breaks." This is the person he's wrestling with, Jacob says, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And then we get to our scripture reading for this morning. It says, so he said to him, what is your name? He said, Jacob. And he said, God, who is wrestling with Jacob, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men, and have prevailed. This is the turning point in Jacob's life. This is the crossroads that all his life's experiences have brought him to. He's struggling to forgive his brother. He's struggling to forgive his father. He's struggling to forgive his father-in-law. He's struggling with the guilt of tricking his father. He's tricking his brother. And he comes to this point and he's wrestling with God. And God eventually asks him, what is your name? What does Jacob mean? Supplanter. Con artist. God asks him exactly the question May said, who are you? Jacob's entire identity, not just his name, is described in this word. His whole life has been a deception. His whole life has been a challenge. His whole life has been a struggle. His whole life has been holding on to his brother's heel, trying to pull people back, trying to pull himself up. His whole life is defined by his name, ironically, both physically, but also the entirety of his life. Now, please don't get it wrong that I'm asking you to change your name this morning. But sometimes we feel like our life is defined by our circumstances, by our name, by the experiences that we've gone through, where we're born, our parents, the life that we've been given, the choices that we have made previously, the challenges that we have gone through because of our choices or because of our decisions. And Jacob feels that way. The entire weight of his life is born in his name. And what God does is one of the most miraculous things, because as you are aware today, there is a whole country named after Jacob's due name. He says, your name shall no longer be called Jacob. In other words, what God promises Jacob is, your name will no longer be con artist, supplanter, deceiver, deceptor, lack of forgiveness, struggle to forgive, struggle with life. Your name is no longer to be that, but your name is to be Israel, which means prince with God. For you have struggled with God and with men, and have prevailed. Sometimes when we talk about forgiveness, sometimes we talk about making a breakthrough in our life when there's been lots going on in our life. We always see it as just a single decision that we have to make. Like, I decide to forgive, yes or no. I want to forgive Fred, yes or no. Heinrich deserves to be forgiven, yes or no. And while those things may be true, while those things may be correct, what God is trying to illustrate to Jacob is that it is not a single binary decision, but it is a fact that he has struggled with God and with men for many years. How old is Jacob at this point, do you think? 4 wives and 11 kids. No, maybe older. Maybe a bit older than that. Bible scholars think he was in his 60s, 70s. All his life, today's life expectancy in Australia is about 80-something. It's almost the entire life. He has been struggling with God and with man. And now, only now, when he's faced the deepest, darkest moment of his life, crossing back neither to anything good that he thinks is ahead or behind, he prevails. Many of us think that forgiveness is a single decision. We either decide yes or no. But what this illustrates to us, what this story tells us, is that it's actually a long journey. It's not a journey that necessarily is long in the context of it must take you 70 years to forgive someone. That's not what I'm saying. But the concept and the context of forgiveness is that it's always a wrestle with God and with man. That's where that's where that concept of wrestling comes from. It's a concept where you struggle and have prevailed. So if you're going through some challenging times in life, if you're going through some difficulty, either at a personal level, like with one-on-one with someone else, or whether you're going through a difficult crossroads, whatever that crossroads may be, the struggle is not necessarily just yes or no. It's that God is calling you to struggle and prevail. The most common time we see this as an example is in the concept of Substance abuse. People who struggle with substance abuse don't necessarily struggle with alcohol, even though they struggle with alcohol. They struggle with the concept of going back and forward from alcohol. It's not the substance that holds so much allure. Yes, that's true. But it's the struggle that they have to go through in between to understand how to prevail over it. So that when they can look at a bottle of alcohol, they don't actually want to drink it. Or they choose not to. Does that make sense what I'm trying to say? If we adopt that same mindset, that revolutionizes and changes. Jacob is no longer just deciding, do I need to forgive my brother or not? Am I going to offend him or not? Can I appease him or not with my gifts? But that he has gone through the struggle and can prevail. That no matter what happens when he crosses that river, that God has changed his name. The wrestle for forgiveness, the true completion of the wrestle for forgiveness ends with a mindset that says, I have struggled, but I have prevailed. It may be a struggle to forgive someone at the most basic level, but God promises that you can come through and prevail. It may be a struggle in your life for other decisions, but God promises that you have struggled with God and man and prevailed. Jacob was not able to get to this point. It took him 70 years of learning before he was able to get through to prevail. No matter how many difficult challenges you have gone through in life, you are going through. Maybe it's something that you need to come to God with, just like Jacob's wrestling match. God promises that you can walk through, struggle through, and prevail. He doesn't just say, oh, good luck on you, you guys have to just struggle and you go figure it out, and that's, good luck. But he says that you can struggle through with God, with men, and prevail. Jacob answered saying, tell me your name. He goes back and he says, why is it that you ask about my name? And he blessed him there. Such an ironic thing, right? God asked Jacob his name, and then Jacob asked God his name, and then God says, why are you asking about my name? Because why? Why is this? If you read, and I don't have time to go through it in detail, but what God is actually saying here is that you have experienced my name. Because my name, when I changed it to Prince of God, describes that you have struggled and prevailed. Jacob realizes, and he says, so he called the name of the place Peniel, where he wrestled, the place, the physical location. For I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. True forgiveness comes at the end of the wrestle, when you have seen God's hand in your life, so much so that you're willing to forgive someone else. True breakthroughs come when you see how you can prevail after you've gone through a whole lot of struggle with God and with men, and you have seen God face to face in your life, and your life is preserved. It's not just the need of forgiveness that we have, but it's also the struggle and the wrestle through forgiveness. But when we prevail on the other side, it gives great, incredible promise and encouragement for our life. I hope that's our experience as we ponder on this topic a little bit more. Over the next couple of sessions, Fred and Heinrich will share a little bit more about the practical components of this, what this struggle actually means. We know there's a need, we understand that there's a struggle. How do we get through the struggle to prevail at the other side?